But my point remains that, in my opinion, you are more likely to be hurt by global warming policies than by man-made global warming itself. I mean, you just look today. The Albanese government copped another hit, this time from one of its own ministers, over its disastrous plan, falling to bits, to somehow replace our coal-fired electricity generation with lots of solar panels and massive wind turbines instead, plus 10,000 kilometres of big transmission lines by 2030 to join them all up. Now, Transport Minister Catherine King has now joined so many other Australians to blast those ugly transmission lines, or at least the ones near her seat of Ballarat, telling the energy market operator, "I've been shocked and disappointed by the lack of respect that has been shown to local communities and the lack of consideration of their land uses, local government views and landscape. They are a blight on the landscape." Joining me every Wednesday is Nationals Senator Matt Canavan, the former Resources Minister. Matt Canavan, great to see you. Look, a lot of people around the country have been appalled to see these massive wind turbines being pushed in them, 1/4 of a kilometre high they are, plus the transmission line, seriously holding up the government's green revolution. Now even a minister complaining. How significant is that?
Well, clearly the Labor Party is very worried about their seats here, Andrew, and they should be worried because there's an absolute firestorm brewing through the bush. The biggest issue I get stopped in the street about is this issue of foreign-based, often, renewable energy companies destroying our natural environment. I mean, we have this idea that we can save the planet by destroying our pristine wilderness here in this country. It is totally absurd, and as Nick Cater said to me on the weekend, we're not going to save the polar bear by killing the koala bear. And that's what's happening right now. These projects are going in some of the most pristine wilderness places in our country. They're the last reserves often for koalas, for sugar gliders, and people just are absolutely revolting about it. And obviously Catherine King's feeling the heat there in her seat of Ballarat. It's a proud working class town that's almost always voted the Labor Party, and the thanks they're getting for having elected a Labor Party government is for their local area to be destroyed to assuage the moral guilt of the new Labor voters in inner city areas that are often living in concrete jungles far from any natural environment that they purport to want to protect.
Yeah, but, you know, in the meantime, the government's saying, oh, global warming is a terrible threat. Look at New South Wales, the fires, etc., etc. That's why we have to do it. You had Liberal frontbencher Michael Sukkar today saying he doesn't believe the heat wave in New South Wales is caused by man-made global warming. Is he right?
Well, I agree with him. I mean, if climate change is causing this heat wave, what caused the record cold temperatures in May? I mean, that was just 4 months ago. Do you remember that, Andrew? Yeah, 4 months ago, we had record cold in Sydney, record cold across Australia. And obviously, whenever it's cold, we get told that weather is not climate. You can't blame some snow in May on climate change. But whenever it's hot, it's the reverse, and it's absolutely always and everywhere due to climate change. I mean, this country does get hot, and you summed it up very correctly in your editorial there, that this is just becoming an excuse. Climate change is now a convenient scapegoat for the incompetence of our governments, to failure to plan for our water supply needs, to failure to do the appropriate backburning that we should do to protect our environment from fires. I mean, these have always been things that have existed in Australia. And until this date, until this latest batch of incompetent leaders, we've actually reduced the number of people dying from natural disasters by 98% over the past century. There are 98% fewer people around the world dying from natural disasters than there was 100 years ago. Almost invariably, that's because the use and harnessing of fossil fuels has enabled us to control and protect ourselves from the natural environment. And we're just failing to learn those lessons now and scaring our children with these ridiculous climate change warnings.
And yet it's a real religion. It really appeals to the inner zealot in some people and the inner bully, because you've got, meanwhile, the radical environmental group that invaded the home of Meg O'Neill, head of the gas giant Woodside, with an ABC film crew in tow, let's not forget that detail, invaded her home in the early hours of the morning.
Shocking.
Has now held a smoking ceremony outside the home of Woodside director Ben Wyatt, who actually has Aboriginal ancestry himself. Matt, this is just getting too aggressive, isn't it?
Well, these guys are terrorists. They're eco-terrorists, and like any terrorist, you can't negotiate with them. And what's the saddest thing about this, Andrew, is Woodside, of all the oil and gas companies, they're one of the more woke ones. They've come out hard and long for a carbon tax. always spruiking how green they are and how they're offsetting their emissions, moving to the hydrogen stuff, all that rubbish. And yet they still cop this. And so I just hope, I mean, I'm hoping probably against hope, but I hope it would be a lesson to corporate Australia that these people are not your friends, that they're never going to be your friends, and they really do want a revolution. They hate you more than they probably hate me. And so why are you trying to negotiate with these people when they'll invade your home, they'll invade your family's space, regardless of whatever you do for their purported ends? There's a radical agenda here behind a lot of this climate change rhetoric, and a lot of it is anti-business, anti-capitalist. They want to fundamentally change our society, and the sooner we realise that and actually fight back against it, the more common sense has a chance of returning to our policy space.
Yeah, they don't realise that if you go woke, then the activists think, oh, you're on our wavelength, we can really go you, we can really shame you. Whereas if you're unapologetically against their agenda, like you and me, we're impervious to that kind of stuff. We feed on it. Matt, late news this afternoon. The board of Qantas has announced that it's cutting the bonuses of former Qantas boss Alan Joyce by $2.2 million because of damage done to the airline's brand. And he could be doctoring about another $8.3 million of his final payout, it says. His final payout of $21 million. He won't be crying poor in the streets. But anyway, that adds up to more than $10 million of docking if Qantas is found guilty of misconduct by selling seats on flights that are already cancelled. Justice there, Matt, or you'll believe it when you see it? How's that work?
Well, I think it's the bare minimum they could do. I mean, as you say, no one I think will be crying for Alan Joyce. The damage he's done, potentially he's done to Qantas. I mean, the costs for them are going to possibly be in the hundreds of millions of dollars with the court case they lost last week for the 1,700 workers they sacked illegally. Now the allegations with the ACCC, of course, as well. So he probably doesn't have enough money, as much money as Alan has. He probably doesn't have enough to actually make whole the damage he's done to Qantas. But he's gone now. I still think the board has questions to answer, and not sure why they continue to hold their jobs. They've got to be, ultimately, the buck should stop with them too. Here, it's very sad what's happened to one of our nation's most prized brands. Hopefully they can recover themselves and recover themselves quickly.